Great. So welcome to our community call on staffing models and supports. I've put together, similar to our call last 2 weeks ago, I've put together a little poll just to get a sense of where we are and what we're facing that'll help boost our conversation and get us into kind of the same shared context together. So the way I'm coming at this is in previous community calls and in our community survey, we're often looking for what are the main supports that retreat center leaders need. And as we ask that question, we start tracking where we're seeing themes. And out of that has come some needs around leadership and governance, which is what we talked about on our last call, but also around staffing models. I know some centers are really innovating with how they're structuring staff. Some centers are new and they're curious what other innovations are out there because they have a lot of flexibility to try new things. Some centers are much more established and seasoned, but are facing shortages and a lot of turnover. And some folks are established and things are going well, but they want to be on the cutting edge and they want to improve things that have kind of gotten stagnant. So there's a lot of different ways that we could have this conversation. For me, it's a little bit of a guessing game too about what the next step is that you might need from each other because I'm so far removed. So sharing a little of my context, I'm not working in a retreat center. So I'm not on site. I'm not seeing staff interactions. I don't know how things are going. I don't know how burned out people might be and how different roles are being affected differently right now at this stage of the season, this stage of your organization's growth, this stage of the pandemic, so many different factors. So this is really helpful for me to get a sense of where we are, where RCC might be able to chip in more in the future. Do we need to have continuing conversations on this? These kind of calls will help me see that. So any input that you can give me, private chat is great. Send me an email afterwards or even lift something up in the call today. That's really helpful for me so that I can keep those supports coming through as much as we're able. So I'm going to launch this poll, which I just, that's why I needed to end it. Let me see if I can relaunch this poll, which I launched with Aaron and we were testing it and we were like, oh, let's change that wording. And then I wasn't able to edit it because I'd already launched it. So feel free to jump in there and see if there's a spot that feels right in question 1. And I'll just illustrate for question 2, where I name case studies. There, I'm talking about a more in-depth analysis of a specific story that someone might share on the call here. So if that's helpful for you, that's what I mean by a case study. More in-depth, we choose one story and we kind of go into it. But the rest we felt good about. So check whatever feels right to you. We're about 3/4 of the way there. I'll just give another 20 seconds here for folks who are kind of finishing up. There may be some folks who are calling in as well and aren't able to see the poll. Anybody calling in on the phone? Can you see polls from mobile? I'm curious how that works. All right, let's take it from there. I'm going to end the poll and share the results with you so we can kind of see what the trends are together. And Aaron, if you could grab some screenshots of this, that would be great. Thank you. Number 1, it's rare for us to find our groove. I'm really pleased that someone has. Great to hear of new energy. Understaffed seems to be the leader here. Quite a spread though, a lot going on. Looks like peer identified best practices, which is really similar to our last call. That's great. We can do that. We can do that today. And we can also celebrate and go a little deeper into a specific case study if we need to. I will stop sharing there. Is there anything specific from there that jumps out to you as a trend that really tracks with your center across centers that feels supportive to you or feels surprising to you? I'm curious to see how this represents some of us individually. Are we all understaffed? Is that just like unending? Okay.
We were staffed up for 9 glorious days.
Oh.
Until until somebody found something else elsewhere. She wasn't looking for something. But what I wanted to mention, and hi everybody, I'm Claire from Siena Retreat Center in Racine. One of the things that really resonated with me about the survey that we just did is the organizational shift between the needs of our retreat centers and the newer staff maybe coming in, or those cultural shifts, cultural tensions. I'd be interested at some point in hearing more about people's stories, because we're experiencing that.
And maybe I could just build on that. Hi, I'm Leslie from Prairie Woods in Iowa. We were founded by Franciscan sisters. So part of our challenge is that transition from women religious to lay staff. So it has elements of those things. Just even the idea about the role people were playing. So
as sisters step back and lay leaders step in. Yeah. Travania, did you have something?
Yeah, so actually building on that, we were originally conceived very much as a Dharma center, and yet we run now largely on volunteer staff with New York State regulations that you can only ask for 30 hours a week of working time versus people who dive in and do whatever is needed whenever is needed. But then with the added complexity that, you know, we're 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But we're nonprofit. We can't work like a hotel that has a day shift and a night shift. Surely other people are facing the same problem, and I would be really eager to hear brilliant solutions to that.
So we work in a very similar model. We do have staff, but we are falling under the regulations for only 30 hours a week. And we have residents that live on site full time. And typically we had always just had 2 residents at a time. And we've had to change our model to adapt to that, to having 3 so that we can meet that. Because I think we're actually down to 25 hours a week in British Columbia in Canada. So moving to 3 now, it makes it very difficult for our own accommodations and where we can actually house them easily without displacing a guest or someone that's on retreat. But that has helped a lot because it's allowed us to then have that full coverage. We just have to do a bit more juggling with accommodation.
I have a,
Hi,
yes, Suzanne.
Suzanne Beejan from Stansfield, Minnesota, ARC Retreat Community. We too are 24/7, 365. moving from a Christian traditional kind of Lutheran-based model to an interspiritual. We used to be fully stipend volunteers and now moving to paid staff. We are under the state regulations of a hotel and boarding home. So we're learning and growing and trying to come up with a model that makes sense. We do have some residential staff as well as staff coming in, but we haven't perfected it yet. I'm hoping, I was looking for the magic bullet on this call, but definitely am interested in sharing and having conversations with all of y'all.
The theme I'm hearing there is a transition from volunteer to paid staff. And also a transition, Danya, I think you were mentioning from 2 on-site residential to 3, but then that sort of interrupting on-site guests. I'm wondering if other folks are making changes in that pattern, and if that's working, you know, or have you tried a change and it didn't work and so you've backed out of it? Or did you find something that worked?
We've actually gone from 4 volunteers to 8, which really cuts into our guest rooms and still doesn't feel like enough because, again, you still need staff to manage the, you know, you can't just leave the center in the hands of volunteers.
Hi, it's Terrence McCory from Linwood in Spiritual Center in Rhinebeck, New York, just down the street from Reggie is at a mega. What we've started to do for overnight coverage, because we'll have retreats during the week and weekend, and I'm not sure how bookkeeping has done it, but we'll have some staff cover for minimum wage, not their usual staff fee. So it ends up being sort of a separate category. Now, if they end up going overtime, I think you have to pay overtime anyway, but you pay it based on a combination of their fees, right? So if you've got a maintenance person who's going to be our overnight, then you combine the minimum wage and the maintenance, you find that middle ground for their overtime if they go over. But that's one way. And then there's a couple of us who are on salary. So myself, I'm on salary. And so basically just you could just work till you pass out, throughout the week. But so I will cover a weekend or 2 a month as well. There's still a couple sisters in residence, well, actually just one, who will kind of be that point person for emergencies. So that's, we've been trying to figure that solution out ourselves as our community residents, start to age out. Like I said, we didn't need it before because they would handle it. Now there's just one. So we're kind of mixing our staff as well as those salaried employees to cover those days. Some of our returning groups, they've been coming here for decades, so they really don't need it. We do have an emergency number, and so we've got someone like 20 minutes away. So, you kind of have to be a little creative and work with what you have. But it's definitely one of our bigger challenges as well.
Is the staffing dynamic connected to the volunteer dynamic? in society, it seems like there's some folks who are doing really well with having plenty of volunteers. And I think there are other places that are really challenged to get enough volunteers to the whatever the pre was, a pre-time. And certainly the lay of the land is different with employees, it seems like employees wanting to work remotely, whereas a lot of our places are brick and mortar places, and we can't run them remotely in the same way as potential employees want. It feels like there's a lot of constellation of what's going on with volunteers affects what's going on with staffing and vice versa.
Absolutely.
So our center, we purchased what had been a Christian camp, but hadn't been in much use for several years in 2018, with the initial intention primarily of hosting silent meditation retreats in the Insight tradition, and but quickly pivoting to roughly like half and half that, and other kinds of retreats focusing on bringing nonprofits and other groups together. And we're still, our first big year was going to be 2020, and then the pandemic hit, so we had to pivot and shift things and all that. And I think I resonate a lot with this sort of volunteer versus paid staff. I think we're able to get volunteers as part of the meditation retreats, and in fact, most people who attend are expecting that they'll do what they call a yogi job every day, like a half an hour of washing dishes or whatever. But then when we have other, we need more staffing for the other parts, or maybe eventually we'll be able to establish more consistent volunteers. I think there are a lot of people who would volunteer, because it's not like we're doing corporate retreats. We're doing things of interest and benefiting different communities. So, but we're in the process of hiring our first kind of chief operations officer, and a couple other big roles to add. So it'll be interesting to hear how other people are staffed and so forth. And and Andreas, who's also on this call, has been basically doing it. Well, a lot, has been wearing a lot of hats until we hire up recently. So thanks.
It's always exciting to me to see the diversity of centers and still the overlay of themes that really do kind of run through. I love what Travania shared about being a Dharma community and having some of the same challenges as a vowed women religious Catholic community, where there was an on-site residential live-in community that was available all the time to chip in, and now that's not the same. So we're all innovating in different ways, and some of us are facing very similar challenges, even though it might not look like it from the outside. I have a whole stack of questions here, maybe 7 questions that I can use to like toss into the circle to keep the ball rolling if we need to. But I like how things have organically flowed so far. So if there's a thread that someone wants to pick up from what's already here, I'd welcome that.
I'm wondering if I could throw out a question related to solving staffing challenges. As fewer of our Franciscan sisters are living on the property, we're beginning to wonder about work exchange models where we might offer people residential room and board in exchange for a role, and maybe it's a combination of room and board and a smaller wage, as we're trying to deal with needing to have someone on site. The person whose phone number has been on all our emergency cards is now 84. His sister Lucille, also living on the property, is 94. So, you know, just thinking about, I've gotten pushback related to IRS regulations, legal considerations. So just wondering about that.
Hi, everybody. I'm Margarita, here in Philadelphia. Leslie, just to respond. Summer camps have been doing that forever. So, I think in many ways, the American Camping Association might be a place you may want to go to discover how that's done, any kind of ramifications that you're facing, but that's not new in terms of residential spaces, and especially around camping programs. And, we do a lot of parallel as retreat centers with camps. And so they have some very good best practices that you may want to check out.
Thank you. That's super helpful.
I'm curious if we could circle back to Claire. I think what you were bringing up about the tensions, which feel cultural, but maybe generational or a combination. And I think you might have named a desire to work remotely, but there was something else to it too, a different approach to work, or a different approach to retreat, or a different understanding of what we do or what it could be done. I'm not sure, but maybe you can articulate that a little more. I feel like that's a thread that we're going to start hearing more and more as this turnover brings in a younger or a much younger generation. And I also want to name that we are working with Cal Poly Industrial Engineering College students who are having conversations with retreat center leaders, and then they're giving me some of their feedback, and it is so interesting how they are learning about retreat and the way they see it. So yeah, I would love, Claire, if you could share a little more.
Oh, thanks, Ben. Yeah, specifically, I was thinking of folks who come onto our staff who love the mission, love the idea, and also really don't want to work after hours, don't want to be the on-call person, don't want to work on site. And there are moments where I've really had to be quite forthright about our operations. It's not like we can't expand and reimagine, rethink what we do. And yet at the same time, job descriptions are really clear in some cases. This is an on-site position. This is an on-site, program that we're having. So there's that specific question. And for me, it feels like we have gone from, in a way, we've gone from the Paleolithic age to the digital age in about 18 months, because we have some outstanding new staff people who are taking a fresh look at everything with fresh eyes, and all of those dear little cardboard boxes and paper calendars that the sisters have had for the last 45 years are now all online. And and everything is so much at your fingertips in a new and different way. And anyway, I see some nods around the circle. The question that I have with that is, what is appropriate to leave behind, and what is core to moving into the future?
Yeah, so good, Claire. Thank you for bringing that forward, because it is just that, is that, we've been in rapid change for a decade now, but what's happened in the last 2 years is, just really a pace that we've never seen. And also meeting this generational piece where a prospect candidate or even a younger volunteer has very different expectations, skills, and values around their work. And that includes how much they want of it and how much they want to be paid, and et cetera, et cetera. The other thing that we're facing, so much like what I've heard here today, again, we moved from a Christian-based model that was run by sisters, was taken over in 2015 by the now society, is now interspiritual. But during the pandemic, we had the opportunity to move from those very paper-based processes and systems, because we were given funding, and the government was also sponsoring us to have our staff stay on. So we were able to actually move through some of those technological projects. And now the challenge is they take a very different skill set. They take continuity, they take change management, and all the things. And so that's really the place that we're having to really look at our staffing model, and also how we're cross-training. And I think that's been the biggest change for Bethlehem. Is someone mentioned about multi-hats. Well, we've always worn multi-hats, but now we really have to diversify the skills, because if someone walks out with the knowledge of how to operate a particular system, our volunteers can't just walk in and do that anymore. It's not as simple. And so how do we keep those simple systems for when we do have volunteers staffing versus the core staff, and retaining them, particularly from a cost perspective, and meeting their needs and values as well.
One of the things for our center, and we remained open during COVID. So some of us didn't have a break for the last 3 years, and are feeling it, right? But we're playing with remote staffing for where it makes sense. And what we're learning, though, is, for instance, our booking system is primarily online, except for groups, reservations, guest services. We had a wonderful individual on site who she wanted to work remote. So we tried that, and we've perfected it. People come on and say, "Are you Cynthia?" Because she doesn't mention that she's remote, and it's seamless. But that took about, I would say, 12 months to really work through. And we're using a lot of part-timers because the younger generation in our center, we're in Minnesota, don't want to work full-time or only want to do a specific thing. So we're looking at, somebody had said, what's essential to move forward? We looked, and I haven't heard anybody talk about the board. Our board stepped in and we created an identity document, and this is the core of who we are. And so everything is based on that. Staffing's based on that. For the most part, you can train on skills, but you can't train on the heart. And that's that tension. And I didn't know where that fit in maybe it's cultural, but that tension of, this is the heart. We're the love shack. That's our energy. And if you don't come with that energy, it's a real disconnect. So one of the board's challenges to us is to create a new staff that's able to pivot in an emergent design, which is very different than job description skills and, put it out there. So it is a challenge, but I appreciate everybody's openness to sharing.
You know, I'd love to see your identity document. That seems like such an important thing. And also your comments remind me, I've been reading an article on holacracy. So, you know, a circles approach to teaming and staffing, and thinking about, because in some ways we're already kind of doing this without any formal intention or knowledge, but sustaining that so it works. That's the goal.
Hi again, Terrence from Linwood. Echoing the last two comments or so, we also did not close because of our residents. So yeah, we haven't gotten a break either. And also moving forward with that identity statement is great. We've done that with the mission. The Sisters of St. Ursula is still on the property, or is still we're still their guests. We're just working in place. But so we continue to use their mission statement, which we had revised before COVID. And so that's something that we share with the staff. We have a Latin speaking staff. So we do it, we post it bilingual. And so it's kind of everywhere. So guests and staff see what our mission is. But the one thing I was going to mention about just what you're carrying forward, which is what we just actually heard, is not just the heart, but that sense of hospitality, right? I think all our centers need to be that place that people come and feel safe and welcomed, as opposed to anywhere else that they may go, you know. So having someone live, having someone here, and that's that coverage we're talking about. But you know, no matter what, because we have an aging population who comes to Linwood as well, along with we're getting younger folks, but they're not great on computers. They're not great no matter what systems we put in. They need some tender hand holding. And so our reservationist is great at that. And so, you know, specifically, she's not in that position because she's great with that population and walking people through registration, through payment, and also welcoming them. So, you know, when they come, they're welcomed. We put names on their doors. They get a letter. They feel really personally welcomed and cared for when they're here, you know, through the whole process. And I think that's really critical going forward with whatever changes we make, because, you know, when it comes down to, you know, we need to be that sacred, safe, hospitable space for folks. And I think that really has to be brought forward, whatever changes we make to stay open.
That really resonates for me, Terrence. This is Ben from RCC again. Just mentioning that the Cal Poly Industrial Engineering students, they've completed a literature review to kind of get started on their research project. And Terrence, what you're just naming, that sacred hospitality piece as being sort of core to our identity as retreat centers, that's what they named as well. So they talked about the wellness sector as a whole, and then talked about activities or events that people purchase as part of that, and then talked about retreat centers, and that it's not just hospitality, but actually a more sacred form of hospitality. So it just really resonates for me that we know this, and I think we operate kind of from there, but being able to name that for staff and also name it in a way that works across generations. How do they define sacred? I think is fascinating. I'm hoping that I'll have more to share from the work that these students do. Just appreciate what you were saying. I have another question here that I can kick in. we've talked about kind of from the organizational perspective, some of the challenges we're facing with staffing. What are some of your staff's challenges with the organization? What are they asking for? What are they wanting that we're having trouble giving or delivering or meeting? What are their needs? I think we've heard this sort of a new way of wanting to be part-time or remote or some limited way of serving. Are there other things too?
Well, a couple of things that have come up at Bethlehem very consistently, and much like all of us, maybe haven't had that break because of the demand particularly when the health restrictions lifted, our demand went up so quickly and we weren't able at that moment to meet the demand of our staffing needs. And so those anchors within the core team are just being stretched so thin, in particularly our cooks and our chefs, sometimes if we have a group that's there for 10 days, that's a long stretch. And so just the need there is just a remedy to their fatigue. And it's physical fatigue, not just the emotional fatigue that the pandemic has brought. So that's definitely a key one. And the other one that's been very consistent is, it's like it started just one day that my door, knock, knock, and talking about wages constantly. And that's because, it's hitting them at home. All costs are hitting everyone at home. And so those are definitely the two key themes that we're challenged to keep morale and engagement and their needs.
So as an interim and consultant, I go into to work with different organizations and often interview staff and ask this question, like what's working, what's not, because they're the ones delivering the day-to-day service. And yes, wages comes up, but the interesting theme that I'm seeing is the clarity of roles as there's so much pivoting. There's roles keep changing. And the demand on leadership keeps changing, and not all leaders are really able to keep up with that, right? That not all leaders are set up for change management, or they've been doing certain things for a really long way, and there's a model that's clear in their heads, and then having to pivot like this. And granted, I only get called into organizations that are in this type of situation, so there's a definite bias, right? But having strong leadership, and I love this concept of an emergent design and the identity document, like having leadership that's really deeply grounded in who we are, what we stand for, this and clarity around that, with enough flexibility to constantly change. But the trick is also, as those changes happen, where's the clarity around that? What does this mean? And is the compensation going to be adjusted as the roles change? So those are just themes that I see with the different organizations I work with.
One of the things I notice, I think it's the same thing everyone's saying, but in kind of maybe different words, but there's kind of an inherent tension of, I think, the need for flexibility, just the nature of retreat hosting and calendars changing and all that. And, the needs and desire for stability and a lot of the staff, and for them, it's their livelihood, it's how they're paying their family. And so routine and stability in a lot of the roles I see, yet the need and the kind of contradiction of, flexible schedules and changing needs of retreat centers and hosting. I'll also throw in the mix, because we're talking about emergent design and all these that I love. I'm also a big fan of Simon Sinek's Why, and just grounding. To me, it's all but similar kind of languages here, but I think there's something really powerful about being grounded in the why personally and collectively. And I think there's a lot of power in those bigger things that ground us and guide us.
I welcome more comments along that thread if we want to follow that further.
I have a question. I don't know if it's specifically along the thread, and apologies, I joined a little late, so I apologize if this has been covered. I'm curious, having worked with various retreat centers and currently working with the folks at Big Bear, this question around HR and how retreat centers handle HR. I mean, as we know, these are relationship businesses, and it's a lot of people management. And I've seen and experienced lots of environments where HR is kind of done off the side of desks, sometimes, you know, by the operations, whoever is leading operations, because they tend to have quite large teams, and are responsible for running, you know, the busy operational parts of the campus. But I'm curious if folks have worked with either having a dedicated person on staff or had a consultant that they work with on maybe an hourly basis if they can't sort of find the resources to have a full-time person. Or is it like a split role? I'm just sort of curious to hear how folks are handling HR within their organizations. Is that a redundant question? No, okay.
The way we handle it is we have been partnering with the sisters who have sponsored this retreat center. And we're in the process of greater and greater organizational independence from the sisters as they look at their demographics changing, and they're pretty much winding down as a community. And what we've been asked to do now is pick up 100% of everything that the sisters do for us within 2 years. At least in these sort of back office services, the health insurance, the liability, business liability insurance, HR policies, payroll, all of that. We have 2 years to now shift into paying all of it. So we're kind of considering, that's plan A. Plan B is to work with an entity that serves nonprofits like ours for areas such as HR.
And we're taking a very similar approach, Claire, as things change so quickly. But recently, we're just in the process of changing all of our bookkeeping function to include more HR responsibilities, as well as using an admin person to help, like more of a junior admin person to just help with all the paperwork that is created from the amount of just staffing right now and what it takes to just be on top of that. So having a bit of an opportunity to do that over the next 3 months to just transform that system a bit for us. And some of that is putting it online so that we can look at more remote work. The other piece of it, we're just looking into, there's some grants coming through in Canada right now. I'm in the province of British Columbia, and there's some grants coming that are specific to nonprofits right now that are struggling in the area of people, systems, and program. And so looking at that funding would be hugely transformative if we're eligible. So we're going to be applying for that before I think the deadline's in February. And I think it's the Recovery and Resilience Fund. But that funding is up to $100,000, and that would give us just what we needed to make that transformation over the course of the next year. So certainly looking at those grant opportunities is helpful, even though it's taking on another project, if it has the end game of bringing relief and efficiencies, especially in the HR function. Whew.
Yeah, agreed. That's huge. Like I think about the leaders in organizations and how much time is often spent with HR, whether it be recruiting and writing job descriptions or incident reports when things happen, or having to handle termination. And it's a very specialized skill set. that I think sometimes it just sort of ends up being the leaders of departments or the leaders of the organization. I saw someone in the comments say that their ED is responsible for HR, and just, you know, HR and employment law are often very connected and adjacent, and having that specialized knowledge, I think is so important as we're growing teams. But thank you. I appreciate hearing how folks are handling.
And also looking at strengthening that function within the board setting as well. So bringing that expertise to the board.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So I have a question around that, around bringing HR expertise to the board, right? And of course, in terms of providing resource and information to the ED, but that one of the things that I see that often gets organizations into some trouble, and I'm curious if it's true in this setting, is having those blurry lines between the board's role and the staff's role, right? When you try and shift from that volunteer model to a professionally run organization, and there's that, you're inheriting this culture of this was built by volunteers oversaw the program for years, and now we're making the shift. There's no one size fits all, right, for every organization, but I'm kind of curious about, is that an issue, right? Do the lines get blurry about when volunteers are playing kind of a staff oversight role? What comes up for folks?
Pamela, I could have an hour-long conversation just on that because one of the gifts of the pandemic in my mind, I arrived at Bethlehem in August 2020. And one of the gifts at that time was, it was the first time we didn't have guests here on a full-on basis. And it really gave myself and the board a minute to take a collective breath. And a part of that work was doing just what you're talking about, which is moving the board from a place of crisis management and needing to really dive into the management and day-to-day and put them back where they really wanted to be, which is a true governance board. And so we went through about a 6-month process to get them there because that was their desire. But as a foundational board, sometimes letting go of that ownership and volunteer mindset is a shift, you know, even if everyone's aligned to getting to the same outcome. So it is possible, but it's just getting very clear in the roles and responsibilities. But also we set up a couple of our committees to be hybrid committees where it was really clear when they were moving into working mode to work on a manual or a specific project, and the project was defined through that hybrid. So sometimes they were representing the board and the governance function, and then sometimes they were rolling up their sleeves and helping myself or another staff member.
I love that you named it, right? That this is a hybrid. This is kind of an exception, and here's the conditions under which we work within that exception, right? It keeps it clear.
Exactly.
That's nice.
Yeah, and we actually put a grid in place to help just to keep pointing back to while we were undoing habits from days of old.
Nice. Thank you.
I'm wondering if there's a piece of this thread that connects to hiring practices more broadly. And if you're seeing changes that you need to make there or new policies. A question that came through in some previous calls was, how are we ensuring that equity practices are baked into our hiring so that as folks come in and join the culture, they understand how we do that? If anybody has pieces they could share on that, I would love to hear where we're at on that.
So I don't know that I have any wisdom to offer, more kind of a question if anyone does have practices for recruiting or just, getting candidates from underrepresented minorities to apply. I mean, I think we want to be a more diverse and equitable workplace. And I don't know that we know how to do it optimally. Like, I mean, starting with just finding candidates, making sure that, I mean, part of that, I guess, is also making sure that we feel welcoming to those candidates. But, is just sending things out through Indeed or whatever good enough? Or are there, does anybody have any practices that have been helpful in that regard?
What comes to mind for me is the slow, steady approach. Because, whether it's through social media or even just what we're including in newsletters on a regular communication, what we're putting out to the public, and as well as just how our website is structured, so that when people are checking us out for opportunities, that they're starting to see that in the way that we're communicating. And that's taken us a lot of time, and we certainly haven't cracked the nut, but it seems like it's a slow and steady journey of storytelling and demonstrating, because word of mouth for our types of centers are huge, so when people start to talk about who you are as an employer, that's a good day. And a part of that storytelling for us is to help people understand that we are a really great place for people that don't fit in conventional, typical organizations. We're a diverse group of people, and it has a bit of a family vibe to it. All the good, the bad, and the ugly, and just being really candid about how we're talking to candidates as well, about who we are, and looking for that fit for the right people.
If I could just jump in and just say that I think a challenge for us at Omega, we're a larger organization. There is diversity amongst the staff, but one challenge we face is the staff that come, and this is more so predominantly from white staff, is that they want to see more diversity, and they're expecting that it's going to be overnight. And I think Danya, if I'm saying your name correctly, was just saying this is it's not a process, it's an overnight thing. And so I think this is not from all the staff, but it definitely comes up, and it's come up more and more in recent years. I've been with the organization since 2018. It's trying to set a realistic expectation for some of them that are upset about it. And what I've said to staff, or actually I haven't said this, I've said it internally. I've said, listen, if you have friends that tell them about it and invite them to join us. It's the organization has a role in it, certainly, and should be proactive. But then again, I think someone said word of mouth does help. And as far as being welcoming, I think one thing at Omega that we've been doing is we're really doing a deeper dive internally and learning just for ourselves as people and as an organization. When it comes to, we're learning more about inclusion and equity and all of those things. And so I think, Ben, you mentioned earlier, asking if something was baked into the process. I can't say it's baked into what we do. However, it's something that is on our radars, at the top of our radar, to make sure that we are trying to include and certainly make, to invite staff from all different backgrounds to come and work with us. So yeah, I think the more that we can do our own just internal work personally and as organizations, and to look at how we can reach out and connect, and who's in your neighborhood. I know something at Omega, part of my role is going to be really taking on like the Jedi work, we're calling it justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion work. And one thing that I'm doing is I'm thinking, okay, people come to the retreat center, but how can we take Omega out to the community for people that have never come, right? And so what are there groups in your community, in your neighborhood, that maybe you can offer something to them and build a relationship? And I think that's really an organic way to really do it. And because again, it doesn't happen overnight. And I think I'm rambling and I've been talking a long time, so I'm going to stop.
Thank you very much, Reggie. I'm also, if I may ask a little follow-up question, which is, can you give an example of an internal practice?
An internal practice, I'm sorry.
Well, you were talking about like working internally.
Oh, to do the internal work. So actually through the Kellogg Foundation, Omega had a grant, and we had a retreat here around racial healing for some of the more senior staff. And that was about three days. And in that process, we talked about, and this was through RCC, right, Ben? Sorry, I forgot. Sorry about leave that out.
You're good.
But
You're good.
RCC, I want to plug RCC, and came, and it just, the conversations that we had and the things that we did as a group and in small groups raised good questions and conversation and dialogue around race, and really set us up to have more conversations and to dig deeper. And so again, that's one 3-day piece of it, but we've got more to do, but it's a starting place. And I think through with RCC, of course, and Kellogg, but again, just through the internet, and there are lots of things, there are lots of resources out there for folks around like anti-racism and inclusion and equity. There's a lot out there for us.
I would just add, we also were part of the RCC Racial Healing Initiative at ARC. And it's been wonderful to do some internal work. But in terms of being in the community, we have a real, from our perspective, a real easy program to implement, and it's called Welcome Wednesday. And we set aside lunch on Wednesdays. We offer lunch and a tour to anybody that signs up. And the whole purpose is to get more volunteers, staff, donors, retreatants. I mean, just because we know we are on Anishinaabe land and our land is magic. Once people come, they don't think of us as Get Out in the movie anymore. They see us as, wow, there's room for us. They see their self fitting in. So it has been really successful. We've gone for a year now and have 5 employees and probably 25 volunteers, not to mention the donors and the retreats that have come out of that. So that's just one way, but I agree, it's a slow process. I met with our founder this morning, who from the very beginning had an inclusion intent, and now 45 years later, we're seeing it manifest. So be patient.
Paul, did you have something?
Well, I was just going to go off what Reggie was saying, and with the whole pandemic, we kind of moved more virtually. Everybody did, but I think we also have to look at. We have Arlene Peterson on our staff here as my boss, as an executive director over the retreat center, and so she was trying to do some retreats on the Jedi models and all that kind of stuff, thinking that people of color will come to our retreat center, but we're in a very white location. And so it's very fearful. And so what we've done is we've decided our building is not just Lindenwood. Our building can go out to sites that have more communities that of color that would be interested in her retreats, that she can do a day one there. And then we offer an overnight one on campus with scholarships and that they can come to get that experience of what a retreat is. And therefore then off of that, it also opens the door for many more people who might want to work at a retreat center after they've experienced it. Because a lot of people that we're recruiting from are people who've experienced retreats. And unfortunately, it's very white and that who have experienced retreats. And so we need to open that door wider and get out to the areas that we can make a connection with, because we got very fortunate. We had our retreat manager position open up, and we had a young lady from Florida, African American, and she's excited. She doesn't have a whole lot of retreat experience, but she has a lot of technology experience and has a lot of gifts that we can even go into business retreats and that kind of stuff. So it opens many different doors for us and that. So, but that was is key, is taking our retreat center not just virtually out there, but physically out there to bring people back in.
If I could just add to what Paul was saying, I think with people of color, it's access or even knowledge that these retreat centers are there or available. And I think one of the things that Paul talked about was opening the door, but sometimes it takes a little more than just opening the door and saying, hey, here we are. It's what are you doing to make those people feel welcome or invited into that space? And I think there is a cultural implication that needs to be acknowledged, so that once you have an awareness or an open to wanting to learn about the different cultures and lifestyles and things like that, you'll be able to understand why a certain group does certain things, or why something might appeal to one and not to the other. There's a whole cultural implication, and it is more than just saying, oh, there's a seat at the table. It's like, what are you bringing to that table? What dish are you bringing to that table that's going to make that person you're inviting into feel welcomed? And I think that's something that oftentimes gets overlooked. And it is a way, because especially with the communities or communities of color, it's all really just word of mouth. It's no different than like a white or English speaking community. It's all who you know and who got you there and how and it's about building relationship more than just opening the doors.
Can I just jump in one more time quickly and just say, I agree 100% with that. It's kind of what I was saying. And again, you expressed it beautifully, but those relationships are important. It's just not like saying, hey, come on, like we're here. People aren't going to believe that until you as an organization are going out to show up where they are, and build that connection. Right. And then maybe meeting them where they are and then welcoming. I think maybe Paul said this earlier, and then having them come, taking Linwood out, and then they're there for a day, and then maybe they come to stay overnight. I think that's how it really happens. And within the organization, if they're individuals, I think there have to be individuals that are doing those things or connecting again to those organizations. And it's dedicated, doesn't have to be a full-time thing, but those relationships and even one or two connections and just reaching out, I think you could see some changes there. Again, not overnight, but it's a start.
I have a comment to follow that, but then I also have a question to toss into the circle. We have about 20 more minutes here for folks who can stay. My comment following that is an insight again from these college students. And I'm sorry that Suzanne just left the call, but that we were in a meeting with Suzanne, and the college student says, hey, I saw on your website that you've got a retreat program of some kind that has D&D, the role-playing game. You're going to be doing some Dungeons and Dragons at your retreat. that sounds pretty cool. I'd like to go to that. I've never seen that at a retreat center before. And as they're saying this, I'm like, I've never seen that at a retreat center. What? And Suzanne's like, actually, that's the first one and we haven't had it yet. So we don't know how it's going to go. But just seeing that like college student light up, I would go to that. It was a light bulb for me, like, that is a different world. And I mentioned it to someone else in the RCC community, and they said, what is sacred or spiritual about D&D role playing? Like, can we be doing that at our center? And I think that's what I'm getting at with this intergenerational, how do we define what community is, or what, transformation, and what are the avenues that get us there? And could a D&D retreat be something that could get these folks in? I'm so curious about where meaning is being made and how our retreat centers can facilitate that. The shift, though, that I want to make from that comment, which I feel like really took us further away from what Reggie and Yolanda were sharing about relationship, which I think is key, is about mental health supports for staff. And I think there's also a connection here. We're talking about burnout. We're talking about impacts of the pandemic and inflation. Do we have policies in place when a mental health issue comes up at the center? How is that impacting our staff? Is that happening within staff? What do we have in place to kind of support staff with those elements? If there's a piece of that folks have and can share, I wanted to make sure that got included, because I feel like that's really relevant too, to this conversation around staffing in general. Mental health supports, do folks have things in place? Has this been a challenge lately?
I will say quickly that in the past, Omega had a therapist that would come to campus, because we have seasonal staff and they're there for 6 months and live and work there. And there was a therapist that came on certain days. They phased that out because of, one, the cost. Also, everyone wasn't taking advantage of it. They took that away. They replaced it sort of with me, who's not a therapist, but has a background in social work and in mental health. And part of what my role has been is finding resources in the area or online that staff can access if they're having an emergency. I'm also there to really talk to, if people have things just coming up just from day-to-day life, stress, I'm there to kind of be a sounding board for that, and then connect them if there's a deeper need with mental health. It has been a challenge. Just sometimes folks having mental health, more severe mental health challenges, or having some sort of critical incident happen that has come up. So it is something that, again, when you have people live and work in a place, I think one reason that also we stop with therapy is that thinking of, you go into a therapy session and you've got to show up and work right in between and just live. It was just too much. Also, the concern was that the staff would disclose things to therapists that actually we should know as an organization, as far as someone's safety, or if someone was violated in some physical way, that we should know immediately for the safety of everyone on campus, including that person. And so we didn't really want to have that barrier there also. So that's kind of what we've been.
I had a conversation with a leader who's at an organization outside of retreat centers, who is talking about the ethics of spiritual leadership, and trying to get folks who lead retreats and lead many other kinds of events to sign off on a sort of statement of how they will behave ethically to prevent harm when they're in a retreat setting. And we talked about possibly this person coming and speaking on a community call. I'm curious how this relates in with ethics and quality of quality of content, quality of behavior. These are things that in culture at large are a huge deal. And I think retreat centers have been so under the radar that it hasn't been something we've talked about in these calls, but those concerns of ethics, I think, would be really valuable for us to look at way before they happen, so that we can really have some best practices in place.
I think another dynamic might be the sizes of our staffs. I would imagine if I was the executive director of a much smaller organization with a much smaller staff, I might have just a different, my needs and concerns and what might come up would be different. I think it might be helpful for us to know just the dynamics of staff size, potentially, because we've got a staff of 12, and Ben, what you just said resonates with me, because I think, well, the larger the staff, perhaps the greater the possibility of things like that coming up. But ours can't be the largest staff out there. 12 is not a whole lot of people. Another dynamic that has been a factor for us is those staff people who, certainly there are some things that working remotely, getting back to remote work, a type of work could work well remotely, but that doesn't always come packaged in a nice skill set or a nice, area of our operation. And so needing to make a judgment call between who is able to be on site, who is not, for the sake of the organization, able to be on site. Making those calls makes me feel like I'm playing God, and it makes me really uncomfortable. And yet those are the decisions that I and maybe others on this call have had to make in recent months.
I'll just share a little bit, I think, for kind of the mental health side of it. I think for us, it's also been a journey of, I think, just understanding the nature of kind of what we can support or heal as a retreat center, as a land. And, I feel like there's a common thread, maybe at all retreat centers, where I think there's something, I started during COVID, so there's definitely a theme there, but staff coming to heal, coming to, have some sort of part of their journey to kind of overcome something. And I think one area that we've just struggled with is, people that are coming out of addiction or kind of needing, where independence and, having lots of space and being a bit more remote in the mountains is actually harder where they are in their life, and just challenging. And so it's also, I think for us, has been a bit of a journey of, what are the mental support systems, and also like, what can we honestly support as a space and center. And we are a smaller team. I think we're about 6 people at the center, more or less. And so it is something where it has a lot more independence, and, it's harder, I think. And sometimes when people need strict support systems and personal support systems and environments that have a lot of oversight. Yeah.
Andreas, I'm really glad you said staff coming to heal, because that is something at Omega, and I would imagine all of our places, that staff, that the healing, they go, this is a healing in place, and shouldn't I? And feeling like when we don't meet that, like you're supposed to help me heal. I think one thing that we focus on during the interview process, we try to screen for, is the focus on your healing more than coming to do the work. Because we're here to work. I mean, we're here, yes, we are to be a part of the healing and to grow, but we have to work also. And so if we get the sense that you're here to do your own healing, you should come as a guest and not a staff member. please come and take advantage of that and come take a workshop, come for a weekend retreat, do that. But if that's the main focus, and I sincerely, feel that you should focus on your healing, and that should be number one. And then when you're in a different place and you're able to come and work also, then great, we'd love to have you. Never said those words exactly during an interview, but I'm just saying that is really like behind the scenes. If we kind of hear things that, and for folks that are coming out of recovery, fresh out, I don't remember the exact language, but I think we have something where we even say, there's some language around that's saying that this is an environment that can be really difficult if you're fresh out of it. And so we do let people know, on, the staff housing, they can have alcohol. There certainly can be cannabis. We don't screen people's bags, but we're a retreat center. Folks think differently about different things. That's the best way I can say it. And so that you should not, that those things may be in your area and in the staff housing, and you shouldn't, this may not be the place for you. So I think being honest about that, and knowing that, if you don't, you could get some real hairy situations, I think. And again, the staff coming to heal, that's something that is a constant challenge, that folks want to come and do the healing work and not do the actual work that's needed for the organization.
I think you bring up a really good point, Reggie, because I think about how many of us that are in the retreat center world as directors or staff or whatever, how many of us really actually take the time to go on retreat ourselves? And it's really just kind of ironic, this is the work that we do, yet we don't allow ourselves the time to be able to do that. I also think about short staff or people overworked or the roles merging and things, but how many of our places have something in place for like a mental health day? Can a staff member just call in and say, I'm having a mental health day, and no questions asked, to allow that person to be able to do that, to become better prepared the following day? These are things that seem simple, that can be effective, but then when you're short-staffed, who do you fall back on? So I mean, it's
I think that's such a good idea. I mean, it would be so cool to have as part of the hiring package that you get to go on a week retreat, and that it's supported somehow. I think that would be a really beautiful incentive for people to join up a retreat center.
Yeah, and I think another sort of twist on the dynamic is that people center thinking that in itself is going to be a healing experience by working there, but not actually do the work of healing, and that can get in the way.
Also, last comment. Go ahead, Reggie. The last comment before, when somebody said, it'd be nice if they allowed us to take a retreat, and that, I mean, I hope your staffs are all taking a retreat. We take 2 or 3 as a staff, even if it's just a day during the year, because if you're not doing that, you're not helping the people that are coming there. And if they told me I couldn't take my own retreats, I'd probably say, well, bye, because you need that, for yourselves, whether it's a silent retreat or what I've been doing is taking my staff to other retreat centers near us. So it's not only a retreat, but it's an educational process at the same time for them to learn about what other retreat centers do. So, and our place is always open to any staff that wants to come.
Yeah, that idea came up in a recent call on resilience, talking about retreat centers exchanging staff retreats. So if you have someone in your region that you could partner with and offer that as a benefit to your staff. I don't know if there's a way that you could rig that up, but we would be happy at RCC to help that conversation go down the road a little further. That's an invite that I might be sending out here if we can get some steam behind that. What a benefit to take this virtual relationship that little step further and spend a couple overnights in another context.
I love the idea of that, of leaving the space where you work, because I think for a lot of us who have sort of operational pieces to the role, that being on retreat at your own center is tricky because you get pulled in and just your presence on campus can get you pulled in even if you're there as a guest. I also encourage us to think about, I don't know that this is a nut that I've seen like fully cracked, but when I was at Hollyhock, doing a program was certainly part of employee benefits, but it was really clear to me after spending a number of years there that the leadership and certain folks that had roles, for those of us in programming, marketing, fundraising, those are the departments that tended to actually make use of that benefit. A lot of the operational team had a very hard time actually finding space, especially in a seasonal operation, to find space to take the time off. And so I think some combination of either making this benefit available when people are off season or in slower season, combined with the idea of going to someone else's center so that they don't get pulled in to operational pieces, that would be a really nice addition to like how we design for it, for operational staff to actually have the space to experience the healing.
I'm curious to know, for folks who are offering the benefit of a retreat to a staff member, if the time that they take for retreat, if that time is a paid time, or if they're expected to use PTO to take that time for retreat.
This is part of the reason why I said it gets tricky for that purpose right there, that question, that those are the logistics of how do we make this possible and available? So that's a great question.
I can just answer for us, not PTO. It's part of their job in that. So my boss told me, yes, that's retreat related. Go do it. Go to a conference. It's not, if people are going to conferences away, well, take PTO to go to no, it's work. And so it should be considered that way. And I know there are some places that say, no, it's PTO. If you want to take your own thing, it's PTO. But we also offer any staff member an opportunity to even do the sponsored retreats, because we'll have speakers come in. We've had icon retreats. We have different retreats. And we've actually encouraged them to participate in some of those retreats for themselves also right there, which is benefit to both. So.
I would imagine it's harder in a smaller organization because at Omega, we have enough staff that as long as you have approval from your manager, since you work in the dining hall, you can get that weekend off. You can't take, as a seasonal staff member, you can't get you can't take a full week workshop, but you can get like a Friday to Sunday workshop. But again, we have coverage. And so it's not like if we don't have that one person, then nothing else can operate. So I imagine that makes it harder. And one more thing I wanted to say just about mental health and the staff and the challenges. I think one thing is that because of the nature of the work that we all do, I think sometimes people can think that being spiritual or digging into more your spiritual nature, spiritual side can solve mental health problems. And I think being a spiritual person can support you in good mental health, but it's not a cure-all. And so I think we have staff, just because of the nature of what we do, that sometimes will look at spirituality as a way to address genuine mental health issues and not really be willing to really focus on the other work, or meeting with a professional in the mental health field to address whatever they're facing.
Such a rich call. I'm so grateful. This is just really wonderful to hear all this. I hope that folks got things that they can take away from here. And the chat is incredible. So if you need to save the chat to take it with you, you may have a way to do that. I encourage you to do so. We have no minutes left. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next time. Our next call is on Valentine's Day. See you February 14. Take care.